Welcome to Biz Jet TV. Welcome, Tom, to Biz Jet TV. Thank you for your time today to spend here with us and tell us your story. So let's start with you. You started off as a lawyer. You studied law at university. You went and practiced law, and then your career kind of morphed in a different direction, and then took you to where you are today. So tell us a story.
Oh, sure. And good day to you, Fabrizio. Thank you for having me on. Yes, I did study as a lawyer, and I did practice for a number of years in corporate law, but my desire all along was to move from the day-to-day practice of law into more of a management or business side role. That opportunity came along after a number of years where a client invited me to come inside and start as the internal lawyer, but the company's founder and a man who is a great mentor of mine said that I would certainly get you onto the business side. And that did happen. And I became an owner of the company, part owner, and was able to use my legal background and training as informative and a basis for being a manager, a business manager. And he was an avid aviation enthusiast, though not a pilot himself, and had airplanes during my whole stay there. I think I helped him with 5 or 6 aircraft acquisitions and dispositions over time. Okay. And I was very much exposed to how general aviation could aid a business, that in that case, a privately held business, very much. And it fed into my long-standing desire to fly.
So what type of business were you in, and where were you going?
Sure. It was, that business was a financial services company. So we had a securities broker dealer and money management businesses, heavily regulated businesses, but growing. And ultimately I ended up overseeing our money management units. And then ultimately they were divested, and it was time for me to spread my wings after 20 years with the company. And I left and became involved in a investment that was a roll-up of specialty trucking companies here in the United States. Those that serve the United States Postal Service. And I ended up as CEO of that company, and that brought us from Minnesota to Arizona in 2020, just as that little thing called the pandemic started rolling around the world. And stayed with that company for several years and left it a year ago, and am now standing up a real estate development company here in Arizona with
nice.
With my airplane partner, in fact.
Is it real estate? Is it commercial or
commercial multifamily real estate development? I'm doing it with my airplane partner, whom we met through aviation and then ultimately became airplane partners, and now we are business partners.
Okay, so you started flying private then when you were back with the financial services company. So were you flying international, or were you just flying around the United States?
I did some of both. Although, initially, like most private pilots, I started in a small single engine aircraft, a Bonanza, which was wonderful. And as the airplanes I started moving up the chain in airplanes, I started doing more and more things with the airplanes. So I did fly internationally in my Baron to Mexico, in Canada, certainly in the King Air. And then as I moved into the jets, those trips started to expand to include the Caribbean. And I really haven't launched much. I haven't launched across the ocean yet, though I got my qualifications to do so. But those things are always in the offing.
So now what airplane do you have now?
What aircraft do I have now? We are partners in a Citation CJ4.
Okay, nice.
And my partner bought it brand new from the factory. And I had a Citation CJ3 prior to that on my own, and was considering my next plane. And Stuart approached me and suggested that he wasn't flying as much. And we're both out here in Arizona. Why don't we partner up? And we did, and it's been just fantastic.
Now for those listening, so you've got what's called a shared ownership at the moment. So does your partner, does he fly as well? Is he a pilot as well?
Correct. He is also an owner-operator like me.
Okay. So how does it work when you both do you want to use the airplane on the same day? Does that ever happen, or do you kind of plan your schedules
We
in a
do
way
have
that
we have a schedule that's fairly well planned out.
okay.
Our travel habits are relatively consistent. We're entering our fourth year of this partnership, and so we know each other's routines, and we're very compatible. He bends over backwards to make the airplane available to me if there is a conflict, and I try and do the same for him.
Okay.
Occasionally the airplane's just not available on a date one of us would like to travel, and so what? We go commercial. No big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
It's not. It rarely presents an issue.
Yeah. So tell us about how you've used the airplanes that you've had through the years to do deals. Where has it been? Tell us a story of where you had the private aircraft, whether it was the King Air or one of your Citations, and if you hadn't had the private jet, those deals wouldn't have been done.
I can remember several. So starting even with my mentor's aircraft, we were doing a fairly significant transaction in the mid 90s that was very demanding. It was.
What airplane did he have?
Pardon? He had a Westwind.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Westwind,
jet,
too.
Westwind. Yeah,
Then Israeli Aircraft Industries, now Gulfstream. But it was a beautiful jet, very overbuilt type of jet, and we were just, the deal had lots of late breaking demands and face-to-face negotiations. This is well before online interviews like this and the ability to access people online. And a lot of times you just had to be in a room with the people you're dealing with. And so he made that airplane available to me on many occasions where I had to get to the acquirer, in this case of our businesses, and sit down and work things out. And there are a number of occasions where that deal would not have happened but for his willingness to get me where I needed to be to do what he wanted done. And
so where were you going from and where were you going to? Just to
in that time frame, it was primarily going from the Twin Cities of Minnesota to both Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. in this case.
So what was the schedule for the airlines on those routes?
Pardon?
What was the schedule like for the airlines?
There were airlines available, but often not at the moments or the timing that we wanted to go. And so, if we needed to get there for a meeting and wanted to make it a day trip because we had commitments the next day, I mean, it's virtually impossible to do in those days. Okay. With any kind of predictability, yet having the jet made that entirely possible. And so we were able to use it to unlock productivity that would have been trapped otherwise. Yeah. Good. So there are other cases too where I've been able to use the airplane to get to meetings that were really important to me to make. But if I didn't have the airplane, relying on commercial schedules would have either had me away from my family much longer than I wanted, or not able to make the meetings on the schedule that I wanted. So that happens frequently. I sit on a number of boards of directors currently, and when you're trying to make board meetings that are on a fixed schedule, but you have other things that come up around it, subsequent to the time of the meetings being calendared, it's a challenge to try and make that all work. But having an airplane solves a lot of those challenges. I can go and come on the schedule that works for me, not necessarily the one for the airlines. Yeah. Do you use the airplane to go and pick people up and bring them to you as well, or do you just use it for you to go? Occasionally. I would say that falls more into the personal category, where we're family and friends. If there's an opportunity to have them tag along, I'll pick them up. Yeah. Okay. Good. So how long have you been flying now yourself as a pilot? So it's been since 1997, so 26 years or thereabouts. And it's been a gradual, I would say, steady progression of both pilot ratings as well as capabilities in terms of aircraft that I've owned. Certainly moving to the jets was a major transition in my flying and I think an enhancement in my safety approach. Prior to this, like maybe many pilots, I was mostly an island. I flew my airplane. I talked with other pilots occasionally. I read, publications put out by owner type clubs, but I wasn't an active participant. But when I got into the jets, I got introduced to the owner pilot group for Citation jet pilots, and that was transformational for me.
Yeah.
I became enthralled with its mission to provide benefits for members, safety, and good fellowship. And it was really that got me focused, and I got very involved on the board and with our safety committee. We're led by an unbelievable leader and a gentleman named Charlie Precourt, former space shuttle commander, Air Force pilot, and head of the astronaut program at NASA, who is a Citation owner. And he took up an interest in our group and safety. And since then, we've developed a whole series of things that try and up our game to better flying, starting with things like we have a set of SOPs, or standard operating practices. While not binding like they would be for a commercial airline, they try and get each of us to abide by very similar types of standards: duty days, when we'll launch, what types of weather conditions, personal minimums, all the types of things that you might see in a SOP book for a 135 operator or a 121 operator. And that's been really good. We have a gold standard safety award. The gold standard safety award contains the elements which, if you comply with them, you get the award, but they are what we believe are needed for a jet pilot, single pilot operator to be proficient in a year. So for us, it's one recurrent training, but also a second recurrent training. The one has to be in a simulator, so you get the full dose, like flight safety or other providers. And the other can be with an instructor, but 12 hours of training ultimately throughout the year, 2 types. Then you have to do some enrichment training. In our case, attending our convention with all its safety content counts towards that. And then you have other things like agreeing to abide by our standard operating procedures, honoring that, honoring a 100-hour a year flying commitment. So if you do all those things, our thought is, well, you'll be a safer pilot.
Yes.
We've also launched some really remarkable initiatives. Again, a group of folks I've had the pleasure of being involved with, but Charlie Precourt leading it. One of them is our Safe to Land initiative, which focuses on the last part of the flight. Trying to make sure that, of course, runway excursions are the highest cause of accidents for jet pilots. We've been able to develop this process through an extensive study with our pilots conducted by the Presage Group about what people are thinking about at the various gates as they come down. We thought that we determined that the standard advice of calling a go around at 1,000 feet if you're not stable just was not realistic. People weren't doing it, and it's not realistic. So we developed gates that are much more realistic to what we fly. But at 200 feet, if you are trending off of airspeed or center line alignment or other factors aren't configured, go around. That's the decision point. You're preloaded to go around. So the Safe to Land initiative has been very important focus. We also have initiated a FOQA program for our pilots, which again, commercial companies have been using for years to review mass data about performance. We're doing that now, introducing it. We've got 50-some aircraft that are involved, and we're rolling it out to more. It's a little different in our group because, of course, all these citations, legacy citations to the new ones coming off the line, are configured differently, have different avionics. So trying to find the way to pull the data off the airplane is a challenge, but we're sorting through all of that. And we've got this great ability now for people that want to see it. Well, was I at VREF at 50 feet or was I at VREF plus 10? I mean, having the actual data instead of just kind of thinking I was close really makes a difference. So through all of these things, safety awards, standard operating practices, Safe to Land, FOQA, our group, Citation Jet Pilots, is really leading the way in terms of safety. And knock on wood, we've gone 3 years without an incident or accident among Citation jet pilots members, which,
yes,
knock on wood, that's a great.
Yeah, because there have been a lot of Citation crashes over the last few years because I've been covering them on Biz Jet TV, but none of them have been from members of your association.
Correct. There are others, and we're evangelizing. And interestingly, most of those, if not nearly all of them, are in crewed aircraft, not in single pilot operated aircraft. And so we're trying to do our part to make sure that we are adding to the safety equation for jet operators of Citations.
So you always fly on your own, or do you sometimes have another pilot come along with you?
Occasionally, I'll have a second pilot if we need to move the airplane, for example, after I land and we need to move it back. Or occasionally, my airplane partner, Stuart, and I, we have a lot in common, and we go to similar destinations or we travel together for meetings. So a number of times we'll be in the cockpit together. So that I enjoy those experiences when I have them, because you always can learn something from other pilots who have experience as well, and what their routines are and how you compare them to yours. Even the small things, you do many of the major things the same, but just the little things that help improve safety. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Because the safety, I mean, obviously, when you are a business person and you're not a professional pilot, and you start flying a jet, whether you're a professional pilot or not, the jet needs to be flown in a certain way, and so you have to go through almost the same training an airline pilot would go through.
You really should.
The simulator, the upset recovery, the ground school, and that training is an ongoing thing. What about scenario-based training? What have you done? A lot of scenario-based training. Have you been into any tricky airports like Aspen and that? Did you go to the simulator to do a special training detail specific for Aspen? I mean, I'm just throwing Aspen out there because it's something we've been talking about quite often lately.
We do. We offer on our site, we have these series of videos called What Good Looks Like.
Yeah.
And we try and explore a variety of items that can catch pilots. Usually our director of education, David Miller, will play the what good doesn't look like.
Yeah, David has been on Biz Jet TV as well. Yeah.
Oh, he's fantastic.
Yeah, he's been on Biz Jet TV, yeah.
And so David will do that bit, and then we'll have Neil Singer or one of our other instructors show what good looks like. And sometimes that involves scenarios. For example, coming out of Eagle in Colorado, and where even on a cool day, you could get tripped up if you're not thinking about the departure and what might happen and planning your engine out, climb out procedure and all that. We've got scenarios like that in our What Good Looks Like video bank. I've personally done scenarios when I train at Flight Safety, and in the simulators there at Flight Safety, I've been training with them since I was in my Bonanza 23 years ago.
Okay. And
they offer, as you know, scenarios like if you get to the end of a recurrent and you have got some extra time, I'm going to be going into Aspen. I'd really like to fly that approach. Let's do that for the sim. And that really helps quite a bit.
Yeah. Now, how have you found, because obviously the CJ4's got more modern avionics than the other aircraft you've operated. How have the modern avionics helped you, in particular in single pilot operations? How has that helped you, with reduced workload, improved situational awareness? I mean, how have you found the transition into this more modern cockpits that we have today? For those that are watching that are thinking of maybe buying an old airplane and using the steam gauges instead of the modern glass cockpit kind of thing.
It's been remarkable. A level of integration of the avionics is just fantastic now. So you enter something once in the flight management computer and it propagates it throughout the avionics suite. It knows what you want it to do. That revolution really reduces pilot workload. I can compare it and contrast it to my first jet. The CJ2 had what we often refer to as the Frankenstein panel. It had a 2-tube Collins display with a universal box and a old Garmin 500 Navigator as a backup. None of them talked. And King radios, the old LED hand dialed in radios. It was very disintegrated, I would say. If you were entering an ILS, you had to look up on your chart just like flying, 20, 30 years ago, you had to look up the approach course and then dial in the frequency and then put it on heading mode. So while you did all this, and then, heaven forbid, you got the airport switched from north to south and you had to redo it all while you're in the airport environment. That was very challenging. And so the CJ3 and in particularly the 4 have very integrated avionics suites. I would say both Collins and Garmin. I mean, Garmin has done amazing things. As most pilots who own smaller aircraft know, they're often equipped with Garmin suites.
Yes.
That's now becoming available as retrofits in legacy jets. And many purchasers, particularly owner-operator purchasers of legacy aircraft, are turning to
in fact, it's interesting you say this because I'm just dealing now with a customer buying some Dornier 328 jets, which I happened to fly back in the day. I was one of the first pilots in the world to be rated and flew the airplane. Mm-hmm. And what they're doing now is they're putting Garmin 5000 Avionics suite in it.
Yes.
For the reasons that you just explained.
Yeah, the 5000 or the NXI, the G600 and G750, all those products are now integrated in STC to go in to these legacy aircrafts and tie what used to be less integrated systems into one, and with much more precision and enhancements that are needed for modern airspace.
Yeah, I think that's really, really key. I think the avionics really need to help. What's your view on AI and AI coming into the cockpit? Now, Garmin have developed the press the button and the airplane lands on its own feature, which has gone into the new Honda jet. And is already in the TBM, and apparently it's coming into the Phenom 300 and 100 and probably into the CJs as well. So we're going to see more and more, let's say, CRM, crew resource management, between the pilot and their R2-D2, if we use a Star Wars term.
Well, I think it's wonderful advancement, properly managed. The pilot has always got to understand what the system is doing, even things that are in the system that the pilot might not be aware about. He needs to know how to get out of those scenarios if needed. I think the Boeing philosophy is still the right one. The pilot should be in charge. And you saw, sadly, with the 737 MAX issues, a lot of contributing factors, but ultimately pilots who did not understand how to get out of the automation that was going on. So
the problem there, and being a 737 pilot myself and having worked in third world countries, the problem with the 737 MAX was Boeing was selling into, in particular, Ethiopia and Indonesia, which were the two places where the accidents happened. Now, pilots in that part of the world aren't trained from a basic standpoint the way they are in the United States or in England. So their basic foundation knowledge is not as robust. So Boeing developed this MAX system on the 737 MAX, didn't put it in the manual, said to everybody, buy the airplane, it's an hour's training on the iPad, and they can go from a normal 737 NG into a 737 MAX, which is okay if you're doing this with an airline in the UK or Germany or the US, because the pilots are trained from the beginning in a certain way. But when you sell into these third world countries, where very often the pilots up in the cockpit got there because their father was somebody. And I say this because I experienced this when I was flying in the Middle East. And you're like, this guy shouldn't even be riding a bike, let alone flying an airplane. So when you get into a situation that they got into, is all the pilots needed to do is bring the thrust levers back by about an inch, and the airplane would have stopped doing what it was doing. And this has happened to a number of friends of mine in Germany and in the UK. They had the same problem. They just brought the thrust levers back a little bit, and the airplane was back into control of the pilot. But over in Ethiopia and Indonesia, the pilots didn't have that knowledge. And so the airplane started doing what it was doing. They were at low level. They freaked out. Airplane crash, killed everybody. So in reality, it's Boeing's fault, because Boeing knew, because Boeing, and I know this for a fact, one of the airlines I flew for, we had Boeing pilots come and fly with us on the jump seat just to see how we were doing. And they would always say, oh, guys, you're really doing a good job, et cetera, et cetera. And they would go out and audit all the different companies around the world operating the Boeing 737s just to see, how their product was doing out on the line. So they knew this, and they just closed an eye and thought it was going to be okay. And then the two accidents happened. So if I have to point the finger at somebody, Boeing knew, and now they've changed things, but they got massive lawsuits, and you being a lawyer will understand this. And this is a bit of a problem for Boeing. But I think that the problem lies with Boeing.
Well, it certainly may. In the end, though, all those people in that airplane were relying on those pilots to be able to figure out a solution to the problem. And the pilots didn't understand enough about the automation to get out of the situation they were in. And that's my only point. Regardless of blame, you asked about AI. What will AI bring to the cockpit? I think it will bring great benefits, more integration. As you pointed out, the AutoLand system that Garmin has is so amazing. As that comes in, understanding how to defend when it doesn't do what a human wants it to do, that is a key thing for pilots. I hope we find a way to make sure that all pilots, regardless of where they're from, third world or not, that they're educated in the right way.
Yeah, but the problem I see, Tom, with training these days is, unfortunately, they're doing what they're doing in high schools now and universities. They're doing it in pilot training. They're eliminating certain maneuvers, and they're just making it a bit easier to become a pilot. And I'll give you an example. When I was training for my private pilot's license back in 1986, I was in Texas doing my training, and I wasn't going solo because I was afraid that when I went to stall the airplane, you had to bank 30 degrees and then stall, that I ended up in a spin and I didn't know how to get out of it. So I was talking to another student one day, and we were talking, and I was telling him about my fear. And he said, I had the same problem. Ask your instructor to give you a spin lesson. So I went to my instructor, told him, he briefed me. We went up, we did 3 spins. I got out of it. It was dead easy. Next day I went solo. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute, this should be mandatory. And then I discovered it used to be mandatory in the 1970s. Then the FAA removed it because so many people were dropping out of training after they did the spin training because they got scared. So then I thought to myself, well, I'm going on now to become a commercial pilot. I better put myself through an aerobatics course, because I think, getting in these upset situations is important, and recognizing, what it's like to be upside down and what it's like to stall and loop the loop and all those maneuvers, just as a background, which I think is a must for every pilot. But unfortunately, there's guys I know today flying 747s and they've never been in a spin in their life.
It's incredible to me. If you watch Smithsonian's Air Disasters series, it's replete with those scenarios where the pilots just don't have any experience in basic maneuvers that they're going to confront. If you spend enough time in the cockpit, you're going to face an upset at some point.
Yeah.
If you pull when you should push, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah. So as you are both the entrepreneur and the pilot, how do you find it sometimes when you're in a situation where you're going to do a business deal and there's a bit of an issue with weather or ice or whatever it may be? How do you separate the pilot hat from the I need to go businessman hat? Because sometimes that can be difficult. What do you do?
It can be difficult, and it could be both business pressure or family pressures. You're trying to get your family to a family event, the same type of thing. John F. Kennedy accident.
Yeah.
I've tried, there's no good magic way except to know that you have to put the safety of the flight first and foremost. If it's in question, if your gut is telling you that it's not the right flight, well, it's better to be on the ground, as they say, wishing you were in the air than in the other way around. Yeah. And so one of the values that I see in the progression that I've made, which is slowly across gradually more capable aircraft, is that I learned in each of them what the limits of the airplane were. And I worked very hard not to exceed those limits. So, if you're flying cross country in a Bonanza and you're making multiple stops, you might be stopping overnight because a storm that you cannot get around or under is in your way. That was true all the way up to the King Air. But even being in jets doesn't give you license just to take off whenever you want or land whenever you want. Obviously, icing, thunderstorms, if you're descending through 30,000 foot high thunderstorms, even if you're above them on your route, if you're descending through them, you've got work to do. And those things are best analyzed on the ground before you depart rather than taking off and hoping.
Yeah, always carry more fuel. Always carry extra fuel.
Carry more fuel. Carry more fuel. Have an alternate. One of our standard operating practices is always file an alternate, regardless of whether the weather is clear.
I'll give you a tip here. Always file 2 alternates. And I'll tell you why. You've got a technical alternate, which is, let's say, Love Field, Dallas, Fort Worth. Okay, they're close by. Okay, so if one shuts down because there's some problem on the runway, you go to the other one. And then you have a meteorological alternate, which is further away enough for the weather to be different, but close enough to be able to then jump in a car and get to your meeting. And so if you have those two alternates and you plan for those two, you're safe.
I like that.
That's what we do with the airlines. All the airlines I worked for, we always have two alternates, and they were based on the meteorological alternate and the technical alternate.
That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, so that's really important. But so going back to the pilot entrepreneur thing, this is what I always tell people when they're buying an airplane. I said, when you step on that airplane, you're no longer the boss. The captain is the boss. But if you happen to be the boss and the captain, when you step on the airplane, you need to be the captain. Forget being the boss. Forget the family needs to get to a meeting, whatever. You're the captain. And so the captain looks at the data and the captain sees that there's icing, there's thunderstorms, there's whatever. We can't go, or we're going to wait a couple of hours for the weather to clear, and then we're going to go, and everybody will have to adapt.
It's an excellent way to put it, Fabrizio. I agree. It's one of the things that our owner pilots are passionate about in our Citation Jet Pilots group is we fly to a professional standard. That means knowing when you have to say, no. I'm waving the white flag. I'm not going today.
Yeah, exactly.
And all of us have probably made flights that we think, well, you know what? If I had it to do over again, maybe I won't. But we want to keep those to a minimum or none.
Yeah, well, I almost, early on in my career, I almost crashed. I was a first officer on a Citation. I had maybe 600 hours. The captain been a captain literally 2 days. And we went into St. Moritz, which is high altitude, 5,800 feet in Switzerland. So we were in Milan. We had to go to St. Moritz, pick this guy's children up and take them to one of the Greek islands. So he was with us at the airport in Milan, and the weather was bad. And at that time, you had to ring the control tower in St. Moritz and ask them what the weather was like. And the guy would look out and tell you. And he said, no, there's cloud coverage and that. And he kind of told us, you may want to wait. So we told the passenger, we may want to wait because there's thunderstorms approaching and that. And he says, oh, no, my friend just landed in his Falcon 50. We need to go. I said, look, if we wait, get your kids down by car. Tomorrow morning, we'll take you to Greece. No. Okay, well, we'll go. We'll attempt to go in. But if we get there and we can't see the runway, we'll have to come because it was completely VFR. You had to land with VFR. So off we go. We get to this point, which was called Marco. I still remember the name of the point. And we get to this point, Marco, and there was a bit of a space in between the clouds. So you could see the runway. So the guy comes in the cockpit. He says, oh, yeah, we can see the runway. Okay, fine. So down we go. We land. So because we didn't have much time because the bad weather was approaching. So my colleague jumped out to go and pay the landing fees. I refueled and loaded the bags onto the airplane. So quick. Jump in the airplane, get on the runway, start going down the runway. V1, rotate. He pulls back on the stick. The plane's not moving. He says, help me. So I pull back. We both pull back. And we barely got off the end of the runway, into the air, hit the storm. Plane starts going all over the place. Everyone in the back was screaming and crying and you name it. We're fighting this airplane up to above the storm. We eventually get above the storm about 10, 15 minutes later. Everything calms down. The guy comes to the front and he says, oh, that was really... I said, well, look, I'll tell you one thing. I said, you pushed us today. We almost killed everybody. Okay? This is the first and last time I do that, I said to him, because you are a very successful man, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to charter this airplane. So great tribute to you. But there's one thing you can't buy, and that's the weather, because God controls the weather, and you can't buy him. And then a few months later, I ended up in a similar scenario again. This time we were landing in Milan, coming from somewhere in France. And the lady on board was a very famous Italian fashion designer, which I won't name. And she wanted us to, we were supposed to go to St. Moritz again, but we diverted into Milan because of the weather. And she was shouting and hollering and this, and she wasn't happy that we landed in Milan. And I said to her, look, you can complain to the boss that we brought you to Milan and not to St. Moritz, but we're all alive. I told her the story of a few months before. She wouldn't have it. She insulted me. She said she wasn't going to fly with me again. I said, fine, no problem, but we're alive. Because that situation in St. Moritz happened once, and I never let it happen again. I never let anybody push me again, even if sometimes I lost jobs. But at least I'm here today at 54 years old, and I can tell the story. And I didn't kill anybody in the process.
Clearly. I couldn't agree more. You have to know when to say no matter what the pressure is. But
Tom, you know how many friends of mine ended up crashing and dying? I told you the story of the helicopter crash in Leicester in the UK a few years ago. That was a friend of mine that flew that helicopter. And, unfortunately, these things happen. So that's why we really need to play the prevention game. And training is key. because sometimes people do get themselves in situations that they don't really realize they're in, like icing.
Oh,
They don't realize that, sometimes there's icing on the wing that you can't see, and that can kill you.
And all of the factors that lead up to it. We had the truth is, our safety initiative at Citation Jet Pilots was born out of two very tragic accidents involving our members in the 2016 timeframe. One involving, you might have heard of the Lake Erie accident, where a brand new Citation Jet CJ4 owner who had relatively low time took off late at night after a long day and drove a perfectly good airplane into Lake Erie because he got disoriented, in dark night conditions, launching over the lake after a long day, family and friends on board. Just a horrific.
Well, a fatigued pilot is like a drunk pilot, and that's been scientifically proven.
100%. And so we, born of those tragedies, all of our members have been sobered to try and not fall prey to those very weaknesses that you mentioned: not respecting icing, not respecting fatigue, not respecting speeds on the gates as you come into the approach environment. All of these things, if you pay attention to them, you're going to have a good day. If you ignore them often enough, they're going to bite. Yeah.
So in closing, Tom, tell us 3 things that you've learned as a businessman and as a pilot that you think have been really key to bringing you to where you are today and the success that you have today.
Well, doing business with good people makes for a good result. And that is judging character, judging who you're with. That's really important. Enjoying the journey as much as the destination. And that is true in flying. That's true in business. And that has really come through to me. And then finally, attention to detail. Really focus on detail. Once you've decided on the overall picture, whether it's a flight or a business objective, it's attention to detail that wins. And that's what has been made clear to me over my career.
Yeah. And one thing I really like, and I've learned back early in the days, is simplify. Don't try and complicate the flight. In particular, this happens when you fly with people that are engineers by trade and they learn to fly airplanes. Yeah. They think too much, and then the plane keeps moving and they're still thinking. So you just need to,
we're flying now.
Yeah. Just keep it simple. Yes. Keep it simple. Slow down. Slowing down is a big thing. Some jet pilots love to come in like a flipping rocket. Just slow down. Slow down. You slow down, it gives you more time. You got more time. You take the stress away. You can think clearer. And that's so. I saw so many jet pilots come in like a rocket. So look, and one of my instructors in the early days, he said, any airplane you fly, remember these 2 key speeds: 210 knots and 180 knots. You're coming into the approach plate area. Start slowing down to 210. Now that gives you time and space. And then you start configuring. You come down to 180. And whether you're flying a 737 or a Citation, you can relate to those speeds. And it works with every airplane because every approach procedure around the world is designed around those speeds. But not many people know it, and not many people teach it. So just remember this. And that always stuck with me. Even once I argued with the captain once because he said I was slowing down too soon. And I said, I got to a point where I said, look, am I flying or are you flying? Right. Because if I'm flying, we're going 210. If you're flying, you take over, you have control. And he took control. I said, fine.
That's the right way. Yeah.
I'll be pilot and I'm flying, you be pilot flying.
Yeah.
And then we had a guy on the jump seat. He was like, oh, this guy's bold.
Well, you have to be assertive. That's right.
It's just one of those things. Tom, thank you very much for bringing your story here to Biz Jet TV. It's been great talking to you and hearing what the Citation Jet Pilots Association is doing. I think you're doing great things. I know the Honda Jet Pilots Association is now trailing behind you, wanting to do the same thing. Pilatus are doing the same, and all the other manufacturers, in particular the single pilot aircraft, which includes people like yourself that are business people that fly their own jets. How important the training is and how important building a community where you guys can share notes with each other and share experiences. It's so important to have this community to help to improve flight safety because business aviation is a great thing for the world. I know a lot of people think that we are polluting the world with our jets, but in reality, we are making the world a better place by saving stacks of time and being able to go out there and do more deals, which creates more jobs, more products to improve the world. And that's so important for people to understand that the business jet is a business tool and not a luxury item, as I like to say it, and it's there to save time. So remember, people, you're buying time, you're not buying a jet. And that's all from me here on Biz Jet TV and from Tom, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.